less than 72 hours ago. Something happened that shouldn't have happened, not because it's impossible, but because it breaks a pattern that's been carefully maintained for years. Iran didn't strike through a proxy. They didn't hide behind distance. They launched ballistic missiles directly toward a location tied to American military presence, Prince Sultan Air Base. And if you understand what that place represents, then you already know this isn't just another headline. This is a signal, the kind of signal that usually comes before something bigger. Because places like that don't get targeted by accident. They get chosen, carefully, deliberately. And when they are, it means someone is testing boundaries. Or worse, they've decided those boundaries don't matter anymore. The night it happened, the timeline was tight. Now missiles launched, detection systems triggered, radars tracking objects moving faster than sound, faster than reaction time without preparation. Mach 5 and above. At those speeds, you don't get a second chance. You either stop it, or you deal with the consequences. And this time, the systems responded. Interceptors were fired, calculations made in seconds, and at least one of those incoming missiles was stopped before impact. Debris fell into the desert. No confirmed casualties, no confirmed damage. On paper. That looks like a success, but that's only if you're focused on what happened, not what almost happened. Because the real story isn't the interception, it's the intent, because someone made a decision to aim at a place where American personnel live, operate, and plan missions every single day. So that changes the conversation completely, because now the question isn't, can it happen? It already did. The question is, what happens next? To understand that, you have to look at the target, not just as a location, but as a symbol. Prince Sultan Air Base isn't just another facility. It's a hub, a center of operations, a place where air missions are coordinated across multiple countries. Fighter jets, surveillance systems, refueling aircraft, thousands of personnel, all connected to one purpose: control, presence, influence. And that's exactly why it was chosen. Because if you want to send a message, you don't aim at something small. You aim at something that matters, something that forces attention, something that makes people stop and think. Was that just a warning? Or was it something more? And here's where things get uncomfortable, because the missiles used weren't random. They weren't outdated. They were designed for this kind of scenario. Fast, precise, difficult to intercept, not impossible, but not easy. And every time one of those missiles is launched, it forces a response, an interceptor, a defensive action. And those responses come at a cost, not just financially, but strategically, because defenses rely on availability, stockpiles, timing, and the one thing people don't talk about enough: limits. No system is unlimited, no defense is perfect, and the more you force it to activate, the more you learn about it, how it responds, how quickly it reacts, where the gaps might be. And that's what makes this different. Because this doesn't look like a one-time action. It looks like a test, a probe, a way to gather information without saying it out loud. And if that's true, then this wasn't just about impact. It was about observation. Now shift the perspective for a second. Think about Saudi Arabia, because this didn't just happen near them. It happened on their soil, which puts them in a position that's not as stable as it looks. Because on one hand, there's protection, American systems, military presence, defense infrastructure. But on the other hand, that same presence creates visibility, and visibility creates risk. Because when something becomes important enough, it becomes a target, so the question becomes difficult, but unavoidable. Is the protection worth the exposure? Because if this continues, the territory doesn't just host operations, it becomes part of the equation. And that equation doesn't stay balanced for long. Then there's the United States, because this wasn't indirect, this wasn't distant. This was close enough to matter, close enough that if things had gone slightly differently, we'd be having a very different conversation right now. Because if there had been casualties, the response wouldn't be optional, it would be expected. And expected responses have a way of escalating situations very quickly. That's the edge this sits on, not what happened, but how close it came to becoming something else, something harder to control. Because once that line is crossed, you don't go back to normal. You move forward into something new. And usually, something more dangerous. Now step back and look at the pattern, because this isn't isolated, it fits into something larger. A slow shift, where actions that once seemed unlikely start becoming possible, then probable, then normal. And once something becomes normal, it stops being shocking, which makes the next move easier, and the one after that even easier, until one day, the move that changes everything doesn't feel surprising anymore. It just feels inevitable. That's where this gets serious, because this doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a beginning, a shift in how things are done, how messages are sent, how pressure is applied, quietly, directly, without warning. And if that's the case, then the next move matters more than the last one, because the next move won't just be a test, it'll be a decision. If this made you look at the situation differently, make sure you like this video and subscribe to Ye the Detective for more breakdowns where we look past the surface and into what's really happening. And tell me in the comments, was this a warning or the first step into something much bigger?